This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your dearest friends at the BBC. Well, some of them anyway. Seeking forgiveness from you, the parish of Radio 2. Here is Joe and Sister Bobby all ready and poised and ready to go, I think.
I am poised.
I am poised.
Excellent. Headphones on. Here we go.
Okay, so this week's confession collection includes A Sheepish Bookseller's Sinful Story, Paperback Fighter, Joseph's Confession, Spice Up Your Strife, and David's Tale, As Long as Cheese Needs Me. Plus a classic confession from the crypt that came about thanks to last week's podcast.
We're going to start this week with Teachers Only Blunder When It's Raining.
Please be seated.
Last one for this week comes from Mr. X, who is an anonymous teacher. Mr. X. Dear Simon and the suppliers of salvation. That's you guys. I'm a secondary school teacher. It's kind of like an end of term. This is like an end of term confession. I think there might be some more, though this is a bit of a shocker. I'm a secondary school teacher. My confession goes back a couple of years to June 2016, to a time when certain areas of the UK were experiencing long periods of heavy rainfall, and flash flooding seemed to be the order of the day, which many people remember vividly. Us teachers are hard-working souls. There are lessons to meticulously plan, which then need to be delivered to up to 15 classes of different abilities and year groups. On top of this, there are exams to engage with, parents to placate, colleagues to care for, and marking to manage. And then, of course, there's Ofsted, the O word. On the particular day in question, we just had the dreaded call. Ofsted were due to visit and inspect over the next 2 days. Oh, great. Suddenly the workload became unmanageable. My classroom needed tidying, seating plans needed updating, student data needed printing and carefully storing into folders, ready to hand to an inspector should they decide to visit one of my lessons during their stay. Lesson plans needed photocopying, and that huge pile of marking needed doing. How was I expected to cope? At the end of the school day, after dismissing the students, I sat down to start ploughing my way through the huge pile of marking. I was never going to get through it all before the school gates were locked up for the day. I'd have to take it home with me. I could foresee a late night ahead. I should mention, Simon, that I absolutely detest marking. It's the worst part of the job. Tedious, repetitive, sometimes depressing to see that despite your best efforts, some students still haven't grasped what you've been trying to teach them. I think Mr. X has got a downer on his job at the moment. At that particular moment, when I thought things couldn't get much worse, some of the classroom ceiling tiles fell down with a loud crash, narrowly missing my arm, and then I felt great splashes of cold water on my shoulder. Looking up, I could see water pouring in from above and right onto my desk. You see, it had been raining so hard all afternoon, still raining hard outside, and now it had started to rain hard inside as well. I remember thinking that it was a good job the water hadn't come in, let's say, a metre or so to the left. Otherwise, this whole box of student books would have got wet, and they'd all have been ruined. I think you can join the dots here. Well, the books did get very wet. I have to tell you, they got completely soaking. In fact, they got totally unusable, ruined. In fact, they were so ruined that I was left with absolutely no choice but to throw them in the bin and issue full class sets of new ones the very next day. Imagine that. All my students' books getting ruined, so I couldn't mark them. It's amazing how luck can change with the smallest of nudges with your elbow, isn't it?
Wow.
So you see, I need to ask for forgiveness, but not from the school. After causing a leak in that area of the ceiling, the water started to come in over the door as well. Then it ran down the walls and into the electrical sockets. Luckily, the small fire, which was started from the electrical shortage, was put out almost immediately by the flood water itself. A shame then that I was so angrily reprimanded by the site supervisor when he came to investigate why I'd activated the fire alarm, because according to him it was only supposed to be used in emergencies. Needless to say, I left the school a month later. Neither do I seek forgiveness from Ofsted. They'd spent 2 days at my school, and despite my extremely thorough preparations, they couldn't even be bothered to observe any of my lessons. I mean, Anyway, I do, however, ask for forgiveness from the students whose work was unceremoniously soaked and then dumped in a bin for no reason other than my workload being far too heavy to mark them at the time. Although, to be fair, they don't usually use their books to do any revision for tests anyway, so I'm sure no harm was done. Wow, Mr. X really didn't like his workload or his marking. Anyway, thank you, Mr. X. A very honest teacher confession. What do you think, Joan?
So when Mr. X says he left the school shortly afterwards, you sure didn't mean left the profession? Because this is not a man who enjoys his job at all. He doesn't like the kids, he doesn't like teaching them, he doesn't like anything about it.
He does start by saying, I am a secondary school teacher, so the implication is he's still doing it somewhere.
I'm glad he's not teaching my children.
Yes.
I mean...
How do you know he isn't?
Oh, no! And I said Coco was really excited about her brand new teacher.
There you go, it's Mr. X.
Oh, no! And I said it was like X Factor. Blimey. Anyway, yeah, this could be seen as being an opportunist, but I think it can also be seen that this is just a terrible, terrible thing to have done. So no, not forgiven.
Yeah, I think people are going to be quite strict about this. Although teachers' workload, Bobby, is very, very hard.
Thing is, it's Mr. X. I really felt for you there, and I was thinking, yeah, what are you going to do? And also, fancy giving you only 2 days' notice to prepare.
That's the way it works. That's what an
is it
inspection
really?
is.
Just
yeah.
2 days? Well, I know, but you still need time to prepare those things because things happen. See, I was going to forgive you for a moment, just for a moment, because I thought you thought about it and never thought you would do it, and also you ruined all their work. Yeah, I cannot find any way to give you any salvation. That's 2 of us. You are unforgiven.
The Confessions Podcast.
So here's tonight's... actually, there's food here as well. This comes from Joseph. It's tonight's confessional. Dear Father Simon and the Sympathetic Syndicate. No.
You hope.
Well, yeah, okay, that sounded harsh. Actually, I don't think you are going to think. No. When I was about 9, there was a boy in my neighbourhood who was universally despised.
Oh.
So Bobby automatically...
He's only 9.
I've got a 9-year-old child.
You see, he owned a beautifully painted, incredibly comfortable and astonishingly speedy tricycle that was the desire of every young boy and every young girl for miles around. However, the boy, who was known as Wiggy, would never let anyone so much as touch his gorgeous tricycle, let alone ride the thing. What's more, he was a bit of a telltale as well. My friends and I would sometimes snatch the tricycle when his back was turned and then madly pedal off with it while he, being rather short and squat, ran screaming after us, unable to catch up. Ha-ha. In these situations, he could always be counted on to run blubbering to his parents. This tight-fisted and ill-tempered behaviour was the main reason I chose him as the victim for what was about to happen. This is Wiggy, Bobby.
I've got it as Wiggy.
You got it as Wiggy, that's exactly who it is. And Joseph has sent in the email.
Yeah, I've got
It's about
that.
a tricycle.
We didn't mention Joseph, but I got Wiggy twice.
Didn't, did he?
No.
I was
did.
thinking
I
that.
think I absolutely said it.
No,
didn't I?
you
Fine, he
didn't.
didn't.
Anyway, I've been ganged
2
up
against
on.
1.
My vote counts for 2. Okay, it doesn't. Now, on a seemingly unrelated note, says Joseph, I've always loved the adventures of Tintin books written by Hergé, and it was while I was reading one of them, Land of Black Gold, I believe, that I came across a scene in which a character uses a box of sneezing powder to great effect. Sneezing powder, I thought. Wow, that sounds great. What a wheeze. I need some of that. I had to get my hands on a canister of sneezing powder. But where do you go to find sneezing powder? You can't get it at the supermarket, and the local corner store had none. I hadn't the slightest, so I decided to make my own. I was soon in the kitchen collecting every jar, packet and box of strong spices I could find. Father Simon, I used spoonfuls, I tell you, of black pepper, white pepper, ginger, garlic powder, cayenne pepper, red pepper flakes, paprika. If it looked strong and it smelt pungent, if a deep sniff made my eyes water and my throat tickle, in it went. I felt like George making his marvellous medicine. When I was done, I dumped the by now brimming bowl of spices into a large tin that I then covered with plastic wrap and secured with an elastic band. Then I poked several holes in the top with a skewer. So I was ready. I've got a very, very stern face from Bobby already, by the way. It's a face that says, don't come near me. Wiggy was outside on his tricycle as usual, lording it over everybody. His brother Thomas was nearby. I knew that Thomas disliked his brother Wiggy even more than I did, and so would be thrilled to participate in my plan. I approached Thomas and laid out the steps. Step 1, Thomas and I approach Wiggy nonchalantly. Step 2, we engage Wiggy in small talk. Stage 3, Thomas distracts Wiggy from the tin that I've now taken from behind my back. Step 4, I waft a little of the sneezing powder towards Wiggy's nose. Step 5, Wiggy begins to sneeze uncontrollably, and we laugh, slap each other on the back, and reveal our hilarious prank, and we all get on fine forever and more. But it's safe to say, Father Simon, that is not exactly how it turned out. First few steps were fine. However, when I attempted to shake a little of the sneezing powder towards Wiggy's nose, nothing came out. So obviously I had to shake a little harder. The holes in the plastic wrap were clogged or something, so I decided to give the box a really good shake. Shakety shake, right in the direction of Wiggy's nose. And this was the moment when the elastic band pinged off. The plastic wrap fell away, and the container, which, as I mentioned, had spices and so on, went flying just as Wiggy's large, wet, pink face turned towards me. Instantly, his entire visage was coated in our spice mix. Peppery spices of all colours and descriptions flew into his hair and down his shirt, down his shorts, over his tricycle, into his shoes. And, of course, his mouth was full of the stuff. Spices clung to his nostrils, his ears, and his eyebrows. Well, I was shocked and I was extremely worried because obviously I hadn't meant to chuck a box of spices into anywhere near Wiggy, really. So I began apologising profusely, but Wiggy was having none of it. Bawling his spice-coated eyes out, howling with rage, with pants full of pepper, Wiggy... I'm not quite sure how they got into his pants, particularly. Wiggy stumbled home, coughing a lot, and do you know, he didn't sneeze once. Not one single sneeze. So it was a complete failure. So obviously I'm going to fall at your feet in sorrow, and I beg forgiveness for my meanness towards Wiggy, who I'm sure was not really a bad kid at all. He was just protective of his tricycle, because he thought, probably with reason, that we wouldn't be very careful with it. So kudos to him. I also seek forgiveness from my parents, who, upon attempting to make a spicy dish later that week, found they had to completely restock on a huge number of spices and never knew why. And obviously from Wiggy's parents, who had to deal with a hysterical, spice-coated child and probably had curry-clogged drains for a week thereafter. It does sound as though there's an awful lot of unnecessary spice attack going on in this. How much do you need just to make someone sneeze? I think it's just pepper, isn't it, normally? Isn't it just finely ground pepper?
Do you want to just run through the ingredients again for us?
Yes, okay. Well, it's spoonfuls of black pepper, white pepper, ginger, garlic powder, cayenne pepper, red pepper flakes, and paprika. I think that's a little over the top, really.
That's a very pungent, peppery concoction.
Yes.
It's a very extensive spice list. It's, not in my cupboard. You get 2 of those maybe at a time, but not all of them.
Yes, that's actually true, because this is obviously a while back, and that sounds like the kind of spice rack you get in modern houses these days. But anyway,
But it was on a wheel. Those spice wheels that were very popular around that time when you had tricycles.
Was it spice wheels?
We had a spice wheel,
Did you? How many spices did you have in your spice wheel? We never had a spice wheel.
12, do you reckon?
Yeah, but you only used one of them, maybe. And you didn't know what the others were. You couldn't pronounce them. And they went mouldy.
That were just completely unused. That sounds foreign. I'm not having any of that. Anyway, Joe, what do you say to Joseph?
I say, you're evil. I said, this is bullying by any other name. This is terrible. It's a terrible thing to do. There's not even much repentance, even now, with the wording of this confession at all. It was planned, it was calculated, and poor Wiggy suffered as a result. So there's no way on earth am I going to forgive this, even though you do use the word fall at your feet, words fall at your feet, and sorrow at the end. That's just a pathetic attempt to get our sympathy.
Yes. Well, he does say Wiggy wasn't a bad kid and was only prective of his tricycle.
Yeah, just covering his tracks.
Covering his tracks, okay.
Yeah.
Well, I know what Sister Bobby's going to say, definitely. Because she looks really cross.
Yeah, I am really cross. The thing is, I understand that you're 9, but you have to learn a lesson. You can't just have other people's stuff if you really, really want it. And if you didn't want to share it, okay, he's mean. Well, that's his label, not yours. So also, it was horrible. I mean, ambush. And it must have gone in his eyes. It must have been really irritable. You got paprika in your eyes. You don't want to do that, do you? I mean, you may not have known, but it must have been really, really painful. And I don't think he deserved that, even if he was a bit selfish. You were mean. So there you go. You're not forgiven. Joseph.
Poor Joseph.
So Joseph...
Oh, no, not Joseph. Poor Wiggy. Sorry.
Yeah, Wiggy.
Not poor Joseph. Can I
Wiggy
just retract that?
Wiggy deserves a badge, at least. If
Wiggy can have a badge.
If Wiggy gets in touch, we're going to send Wiggy a badge, because that's the kind of people that we are.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was Joseph's Sinful Tales Spice Up Your Strife, which features a spice catastrophe, and without wanting to mix our food metaphors, caused a lot of other people to spill the beans on their similar stories.
Not forgiven, and I can't believe Wiggy's parents didn't kick off. My husband, Peter, managed to accidentally sniff one single dried chili flake up his nose when he was shaking them on his pizza and sneezed continually for half an hour. It was the funniest thing ever, but he did do it to himself.
Did we ever find out whether you can actually get sneezing powder anymore?
I'm not sure if it's allowed. You'd have to go to a joke shop, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But it did used to come in little packets, didn't it? Just said sneezing powder.
Yeah, but I don't.
But
I think Joe's probably. Yeah, I think it just doesn't exist anymore because teachers and parents would go, "I'm not having any of that."
Stop it now and put it away.
You can still get a stink bomb, though.
They were great.
They were not great.
I used to do stink bombs
Did you?
in music. Yes,
Simon Mayo.
It was fantastic.
I'm surprised.
Small little glass capsule.
No.
Leave it under the. Well, you prop up the chair just so it was on it, and then the next person to sit on it would. Wow.
What annoys me about the stink bomb is there's a universal rule that you don't let it off in the dinner hall because everyone's eating and everyone needs to eat. And one day in my school, they let it off in the dinner hall and we just went, no, I'm sorry. That's the rule. That is the rule. You know, the gentleman's rule. You don't.
Are there stink bombs anymore?
I don't know. I'm quite tempted to get one and do it at home to my
too,
kids.
you
That would
too.
be so funny.
That would be fantastic.
It really
a little
would.
glass vial of liquid, and then it's bad eggs everywhere.
The state of parenting in 2019, 18.
Just turn the tables. That's the way to do it. Still to come on this week's podcast, the confession that involved a rather interesting hiding place.
I proceeded to take the substantial award out of the box and place it down the back of my trousers, where it nestled neatly.
Ooh.
Ouch!
Like a triangle, pyramid shape?
I was going to say shape.
I mean, if you were going to...
Long and thin.
Yes, I think that was quite saucy from Bobby at the end there.
What?
Anyway, before you hear what happened next, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you, the parish, have been saying. Jo has this with her.
I'm just giving Bobby the right to reply. Was that you being saucy?
Well, no, it wasn't. I was just thinking practically as, you know, the best shape if that's going to be your hiding place. And it seems that... Anyway, moving on.
Anyway,
Yes.
moving on. I have this from Emily in Wiltshire. Hi, Simon, Joe and Bobby. I'm a great fan of your Confessions podcast. You've given me endless guffaws, shouts, splutters and tears of laughter when I listen in my car, when I'm out walking or when I'm on coaches. You know the dangers of this. I'm in my late 30s and have been single for a few years, and I was starting to give up hope of finding the right man. I went on a first date in February with a handsome man who seemed really lovely. We discovered on the date that we both listened to your podcast and we agreed that we were meant to be.
We're bringing people together.
Yeah. Plenty more fish. 5 months later and we're still together and very happy. His son listens to your podcast too, so we all enjoy reminiscing together about our favourite tales of daring do. So thank you, Confessions, for providing the ultimate litmus test in helping me find such a good chap. He's a keeper.
Isn't that a lovely thing? So we've actually... It's like blind date. You know when they had a blind date wedding? It's like it's a confessions wedding.
You are Scylla.
I like the fact
Scylla
that
of radio.
that she calls it the litmus test. Mine is skip diving. What's yours? For another time, maybe.
Skip diving?
If you like a man and he won't go and look in a skip, then he's not for me. That's what I'm saying.
You like someone who forages in skips?
Skip diving. There's always great things in skips.
So you call it skip diving, other people call it nicking stuff.
No, it's already out for rubbish, so if you can recycle it. You ask first. What I'm saying is, if they're not tempted to go and have a look, they're not a keeper.
Have you found more than one man through his love of skip diving?
I've only really come onto this quite recently. I haven't really put it to the test, but that is
so
my
actually,
test.
It's such a tough filter, no one passes.
Yeah, well, that's what I'm hoping for.
Okay, well, that's very interesting, really. I've never even heard of that.
It's an Australian term, I think, skip diving. Yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, we're learning an awful lot. But anyway, it's a lovely story from Emily.
Yes.
And I feel as though we're kind of like bringing them together and keeping them together.
And obviously keep us posted as well, because if there is a wedding, we have 3 people here. We have ushers ready to go.
We are poised. Anyway, we want photographs. Bobby, what have you got?
I have this lovely short but sweet message from Owen, who is aged just 12, and it goes, "Hello Simon, Joe and Bobby. I've made a mass podcast subscription at my school. It was sports day last week and everyone was on their phones while I was listening to the Confessions podcast. When the bell went for lunch, some people were allowed to stay behind if they wanted. I decided to stay and subscribe all of my 16 friends to the Confessions podcast."
That is excellent.
16 at once.
I like that. Thank you very much indeed. Owen, age 12.
It doesn't say how well he did in the sack race or the long jump. So I hope you did well, Owen. I hope you had fun.
This is more important, though. He's given us 16 extra listeners. I've got this from Michael Keat, Father Simon and the compadres of canonical compassion and purveyors of prosaic penitence. Blimey. You recently aired Fern's heartwarming farewell message to Michael, who's leaving Australia to move back to the Netherlands. Well, I am he. She has indeed made me into a podcast addict. Every Saturday, I listen to the new edition while I'm preparing dinner. Same thing last Saturday, so I was definitely stunned to hear that message on the radio. I would like to reply with many thanks to my family at Brisbane Airport who've looked after us for 3 years, and I pledge to do missionary work back in the Netherlands and spread the gospel of Simon and Joe. And as an added bonus, and Bobby obviously, and as an added bonus, I can now listen live to the show every day. Carry on.
We will, Michael Keat. Thank you.
This is like a huge global family.
We are hands across the water.
It's a very warming confession.
That's exactly what we are.
Remember, if you do want to get in touch with the podcast, you might have a confession of your own, or you might want to request a classic one that made you laugh out loud, or maybe you've just managed to do that thing of sneakily subscribing somebody to the podcast and you want to tell everyone about it, boast, then just email confessions@bbc.co.uk.
Time to wash our hands before we go into the next part of this particular podcast. It is the sleazy part of the notice board, the non-compliant confessions that we could just never, ever read out on the radio. Confessions from shameless people who clearly have no moral compass or have any idea what's suitable for tea time listening. People like JT, who found herself unable to leave the bedroom of a guy she'd hooked up with because his girlfriend had arrived back at the flat unexpectedly, and he had to try and keep her away. Unfortunately for you, JT, the girlfriend's presence meant you couldn't get to the bathroom. So when nature called, a towel was quickly utilised.
Oh!
What makes this worse is that the next morning, when you finally escaped, the guy you'd come back with grabbed the soiled towel and headed off for the shower, and you said nothing.
And why do we not broadcast this live on the show?
This silence is my face. Yeah, my face is not happy with this at all. Wrong in so many ways.
I thought that was quite a good confession. Actually, I thought we were going to use that on the show, but it was obviously it didn't get through the right filters. No, she in the full version, she'd been crossing her legs and keeping herself.
Yeah, but she found out there was a girlfriend involved, so girls' code.
What, the betrayal?
Yeah.
That's the way life is, Bobby Pryor.
No, it's not. Not in everyone in your world, not in our world.
Oh, that's right, because I represent sleaze and debauchery. That's right. Anyway, thank you, JT, for that. Wee bit naughty. Anyway, an anonymous confession, always a bad sign. Just because you didn't get on with an old housemate and she moaned at you now and again for not washing up, was that really an excuse to give her a spag bowl surprise one night for dinner? Bobby, if you had to guess, what would be the ingredient that was the surprise? Would it be A, paprika, B, soap, or C, cat food?
Cat food.
Yeah. And these come around every now and again, and we don't read them out. So if, like laxative chocolate, never ever go with that, because that's not funny either.
But I think with animal food, it has to still be human grade food, so I think it's not very nice,
I think it's okay.
But it's safe.
Yeah. But we just tend to avoid them.
But you can eat cat food.
Well, I'm not saying you should. What I'm saying, I think it has to be human grade meat for the animals as well.
Oh, okay.
So I don't think it's dangerous. I just think it's not very palatable if you thought about it.
Just give me an idea for tea tomorrow, the kids.
Oh, they'll be so happy. And Tim, we also couldn't permit on live National Family Radio your story of the dodgy stomach bug you picked up in Australia, and how it's not going to go well, and how you managed to empty an entire dorm room by passing wind so foul that the owner of the hostel actually thought it was a rotting carcass left outside by a crocodile. That's fine. I quite like that one. Oh. Anyway, not really okay, I suppose. But if you've got a story, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
To be fair, it wasn't really his fault. He got a stomach bug, so it wasn't particularly his fault. Anyway, moving on.
Yeah, but imagine it's so foul it smells like a rotting carcass.
You would deny, wouldn't you? You would deny.
Yeah, but why was there a crocodile outside the door?
It was Australia.
That's a worry. I know, but that's a worry.
Oh. Anyway, time now to get back to the confessions that did make the cut this week, and a little bit lighter for your ears and stomach to handle. We have a sheepish bookseller's sinful story, Paperback Fighter, which featured a very flustered bookseller and a frustrated author.
The Confessions Podcast.
Tonight comes from a sheepish bookseller. Just signed, a sheepish bookseller. Father Simon and the Angels of Justice. I work for a bookstore, And although as a bookseller it's impossible to have read everything, I always try to stay aware of what's happening. My former boss always said, never claim to have read something you haven't, as you'll get caught out one day. And it won't just be you that looks like an idiot. Very wise words. Sadly, that boss left and was replaced by someone, I'm going to call him John, who didn't share this belief. For me, John was the worst kind of bookseller, one of those who looks down on books and genres that he doesn't like, and the people who read them, and he dismisses them. Sounds like a bit of a snob. Moving on a few months, we're taking part in a local book festival, where an author of young adult fiction, of whom I am a fan, was attending. Our particular event was supposed to be this author being interviewed by another author, but sadly, on the day, the interviewer had to pull out. Maybe he had travel issues. You know how it goes. This led to a bit of a panic about what would happen to the event. So as a fan of this author, I said I would love the opportunity to ask her questions. This might not be as probing as a fellow author, but it would mean that the event would go ahead pretty much as planned. Despite some reluctance, this was felt to be the best option. Now remember that I said John the boss looked down on certain books. Well, young adult fiction, YA fiction, was one such area he had no time for. So it was something of a surprise when, after viewing what our author looked like online, he decided to overrule his original decision and now insisted that he host the event. I have to tell you, there are a number of people who are very snobbish about YA fiction, which proves that they're fools. Okay, just had to mention that one. I think I'm allowed to editorial on that. I don't think that's a controversial view.
You're fine.
John's reasoning was that he had more experience and was better suited to doing it. In fact, he was so suited to doing it in this role that he needed the questions that I had already prepared.
Ooh.
And he insisted that I gave him my questions. Don't like the sound of this guy. Now, I had written far more questions than I thought would be needed, and as I'd expected her answers to possibly steer the conversation in different directions, but John still said he needed more, so I wrote some extra questions. Come the event, and it was all going okay, apart from the pace at which John was getting through my questions. Unable to pick up on the interesting aspects that the author was talking about, he was rattling through the questions at a quiz show pace without listening at all to what the author was saying. He looked nervous in front of an audience of our author's admiring fans, and all his bravado had faded away. Well, more fool him. Then I remembered some of the extra questions that I'd written in case the audience Q&A ran short or didn't happen at all. And then suddenly I looked at John and I just felt pity and anguish. Annoyed at having to write more questions, I had obliged, but let's just say they weren't questions that would be even vaguely usable. John had asked his last question, looked at my notes, saw that it was time to take questions from the audience. He looked up and saw me eagerly trying to get his attention, but he just gave me a little shake of his head and a wry, condescending smile. Any pity I had dissolved at that moment, and I put my hand down and let him get on with it. After only 4 questions from the audience, John decided to start on the extra questions that I had written. He hadn't bothered to look through them before launching into them, as quickly became obvious. Question 1. In your third book, the lead character obviously had quite a lot of trauma in her life. I wondered if you took inspiration from Katie Price's biography. A question guaranteed to provoke the answer no. A very short and pointed no from our respected author. By now, John is frantically scanning through the rest of the page, trying to find usable questions, but instead he would only have found the following. What's your favourite colour? Can I sniff your hair? How big is your fridge? If you were a cheese, what cheese would you be and why? And at this point in the process, I started writing out the questions from the Monty Python World Forum sketch from Live at Drury Lane. The Hammers is the nickname of which football team? Vladimir Ilyich Ulyanov is better known to the world as who? Obviously, West Ham and Lenin in that order. Anyway, the mood had now changed in the room, and our author had gone from being polite and amiable to understandably frosty. John looked like he wanted the ground to open up beneath him so he could escape, but instead he brought the evening to a close and indicated to the audience where to queue for the author's book signing. It was my role to look after the queue and ensure the books were ready for her to sign, and from where I was, I could hear the conversations between her and her fans. Nearly every single one mentioned these questions, and each time her response became less and less polite. Needless to say, I didn't try to engage her in conversation. I don't seek forgiveness from John. He departed not long after, thanks to his own misdemeanours, but not before giving me a disciplinary. I don't seek forgiveness from the author either, as my actions meant I didn't get a chance to talk to her, and I feel that is punishment enough. I do, however, seek forgiveness from her fans, as my actions put her into a bad mood, and the fans, unfortunately, bore the brunt of it. Well, this is from a sign from a sheepish bookseller. I think, Joe, we should make a note of these questions, because I think, if we're ever stuck in the future.
I'm going to be asking Tom Grennan about the cheese question. Hopefully he won't be listening right now. But
cheese one. Can I sniff your hair?
How big is your fridge?
How big is your fridge is a great question. I think this is really good. Anyway, a sheepish bookseller getting his own back on a really pompous boss. More power to the sheepish bookseller, I say. What do you say, Joe?
I say you're not just forgiven, you are applauded, because you were very kind and you handed over your questions, which I would have found very, very difficult to do myself. And I really hope you enjoyed the squirming and the humiliation of your very dodgy boss. I think the fans would completely have understood if they knew your predicament and the kind of person that you were. So how dare he give you a disciplinary as well? It's just outrageous. So I think the fans would understand,
yes.
And they wouldn't mind in the slightest. So, absolutely forgiven.
And John the boss only saying he'd step up to the mark and ask the question just because he Googled what she looked like. Anyway, Bobby, what do you say here?
I'm with Joe. Almost all the way, except I can't forgive you, because this is the thing, I understand John was our nightmare boss, and I absolutely feel for you. And handing over, we've all done work we've had to hand over to someone else. It just feels, just completely gutting. However, let's face it, it's the author that was the victim, really, because it was meant to be her night with her guests, with her readers, and she didn't really get the best chance. And what sheepish bookseller didn't do is help that. He compounded that. John could have done it enough, but you didn't help. So I'm thinking that you put her at risk, and I don't think she deserved that.
How big is your fridge, by the way?
It's quite big.
Okay, that's
and a freezer. There
Mine's
you go.
not big
Works very
enough.
well. No, freezers
big
are not
enough,
big
are
enough.
they?
So I'm going to say on this that you were sheepish bookseller. I'm not going to forgive you because basically she was the victim, not really John.
Right. People's verdict, please. Do you forgive sheepish bookseller or not? On the text 88291, it's the people's verdict.
Do we know which author it was? Is it that one?
Well, we have a guess. I don't think it was that one, no.
The Confessions Podcast.
Here comes tonight's confession, which comes from Davey. If you miss any, the podcast available Friday. And if you have a confession on the email, please, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. Davey says, Simon, Joe, and the ecclesiastical ecumenical crew, which makes that's you, basically.
I like the crew bit.
Yeah. I've decided it's time for us to purge our souls and seek forgiveness for a misdemeanor 10 years ago this autumn. By us, I mean my sister and I, and our tale starts when we were invited to a major event at a hotel somewhere down south. This was a computer event, okay? A computer event, as we own a computer shop in the sleepy village of Windermere in the English Lake District. This event was organised by one of the very large computer manufacturers, who are best left nameless, I think. This event was very highbrow and was a James Bond-themed evening, so I had to wear full black tie while my sister was in an evening dress. We were all allocated a table, and my sister Marion and I were put on a table with the UK's leading computer retailer at the time. Okay?
Okay.
There were 10 of us to a table, 8 of them being from the aforementioned company, and they proceeded to tell us how successful they were at great length, and that we didn't know anything about selling computers. I thought this was a bit strange, as that year they'd posted a substantial loss in the region of £34 million, which I happened to mention, but was told that clearly that was just negative profit. What a good phrase that is. It's not a loss, it's just negative profit. Anyway, it turns out the rotund, rude man sitting next to me was a director or executive of said company with negative profit of 34 million. As the night wore on, we had a little bit of the free booze and we watched the award ceremony, where it seemed everybody won an award, bar us. The portly gentleman who I just told you about won an award for top executive and went up to collect it to a big round of applause. He came back to the table, threw the blue box down, saying, "Puh, just another award." which was a bit disheartening for those of us who actually hadn't won one. All around the room were blackjack and roulette tables, and they gave you loads of chips to play with. So everyone was now busy either dancing or gambling, leaving my sister and me at the table, drinking and musing about our lack of awards. My sister, who I might add is older than me, got the man's discarded award out of the box and showed it to me. She then said, "You know, we could have an award. if we wanted one, we could just have this one." Now, when your older sister goads you into doing something, it is throwing down the gauntlet a bit, and I decided this seemed like a good idea. This is where it all gets a little weird. I proceeded to take the substantial award out of the box and place it down the back of my trousers, where it nestled neatly.
Ooh.
Ouch!
Is it like a triangle, pyramid shape?
I was going to say shape.
I mean, if you were going
Long and thin.
to help yourself to an award, putting it down the back of your trousers isn't the obvious thing to do. Anyway, they had a few drinks. Davy says, "I walked around a bit and tested it and thought, yes, I can get away with it. I hadn't told my sister that I'd accepted her challenge at this point. As I sat at the table, I realised that the fancy blue box now felt considerably lighter than it should, and it would be obvious that it was now missing the award that was down the back of my trousers. I had to find a way to even the weight back up, so I scoured a few tables and then saw exactly what I needed, right there on the cheese board in front of me. I scooped up all the blue cheese and packed it into the empty gap where the award had been and pressed it down until it felt about the right weight, maybe about a pound's worth of best blue Stilton. Satisfied with my night's work, I left the box on the table and proceeded to head for the exit and to bed, as it was now past midnight. As we approached the door to leave, I noticed our host was waiting by the door and giving everyone a full body hug as they left, and there was a small queue forming for this ritual. Only 2 people in front of me, I realised that if he hugged me, he would definitely feel the glass award that was nestled in the back of my trousers. As I got close, he went for the hug and I politely pushed him to one side, and although he seemed a little bit upset, he quickly moved on to the gentleman behind me. As we got out of the corridor, my sister said, "I knew you wouldn't steal the award," at which point I put my hand down the back of my trousers and produced it with a flourish from behind me and held it in the air triumphantly like I'd won the World Cup. Oh, I wasn't going to mention that. We laughed all the way back to our rooms. The following morning we left and checked out of the hotel, and on the way to my car I saw our gentleman loading his case into the bonnet of his red Porsche 911 before proceeding to put the award, this box, in the front passenger footwell of his car. He was treating it very reverently. He obviously hadn't checked. I have no clue as to when my transgression was discovered, but I'm sure it wasn't pleasant. So I now beg and beseech and implore your forgiveness, not for the large gentleman, as I didn't like him anyway, but for the computer company that gave the award and my sales executive from that company who had invited me in good faith. And there I almost went and spoilt it by swapping a top glass award for a pound's worth of blue Stilton. Joe Wiley speaks first.
Obviously, there is a sin involved here, and that sin is envy. But if you ask me, I don't know what image anybody else had in their head of this boss, the rotund, rather portly top executive. David Brent sprung to mind. Yeah, a little bit of David Brent in there. So he sounded pretty objectionable and just kind of discarding the award and saying, just another award. I think he kind of had it coming to him, really.
Yes.
So I'd say I'm going to forgive. I'm going to forgive Davey, and also his sister. And also Davey was led astray, wasn't he, by his sister? So it wasn't really his fault at all.
Elder sisters are always problematic, I've found.
Are they?
Oh.
In life? Not really.
Would you like to share with us some of the bad things you've done because of your sister?
Oh, I mean, where to start?
Maybe your sister's listening and she would like to share with us.
She almost certainly is. So I can just say none of that is true. She's an angel, obviously. And a leading headmistress. Anyway, yes, sorry, Bobby, go on.
It's really tricky, this one, because the table they sat on sounded really obnoxious and horrible and awful. You're right about the sin of envy.
Yeah.
You're right, they're envious, and let's face it, if you haven't won anything, you haven't won anything, and you just have to take it on the chin and do better next time if you can. And I don't
this
like
guy's
that.
an oaf. He didn't want it anyway. He might prefer the cheese.
Is this guy had no humility? You see, there was his lesson. So, and also he needed a lesson, so he didn't care about it. He just went, just another award. I don't think you should have stolen it. I don't think. But there's part of me that thinks that you just got caught up in the Bond theme, and you on a rescue mission of the
In the what theme?
the Bond theme.
Oh, I think it's a bum theme.
And you.
There's always one who spoils it for the rest of us.
I'm going to carry on. Okay, the Bond theme. Wish I'd said it now. So you got caught up. You rescued it. It's fine. It was a special bit of, I don't know, kryptonite. And you took it back home and saved it and took it back to Cumbria where it belonged. So I'm going to forgive you on that count.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was David's confession, As Long as Cheese Needs Me, which definitely wins this week's Creative Use of Cheese Award, if there was ever such a thing. And if you missed the confessions going out live this past week, then you wouldn't have heard the reaction on the People's Verdict. So here's another chance to hear a reaction to David's story that didn't involve one of Simon's many amazing accents.
Sadly.
Richard Belper, forgiven, as clearly the CJ type was a bombastic blowhard who needed taking down a cheeseboard or two. However, one does wonder what Wallace would have said about such brutish treatment of a wedge of cheese. He then says, "Go on, Simon, do the voice. Can you read this out?"
Oh, what, the smashing award this, Gromit? I don't think that would be
You're not going to do the voice. Give me back the paper.
I don't think that's the kind of thing that people expect from me. You see, what I tend to do is I always think that if the accent that is required is a regional accent from the UK, it always seems demeaning for me to have a go at it, unless it's Cockney, Cornish or Camp, in which case I'll do them.
Or can you do a Camp Cornish Cockney?
Probably, if I spend some time. Anyway, so I didn't want to do the cracking cheese.
Something for us to look forward to, though, in the future,
I
isn't
think
it?
so. I think so. Anyway, that's it from this week's batch of confessions. And if you want to send in something, it's confessions@bbc.co.uk. Don't go anywhere just yet. It's time now for us to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And this week's has been requested by Sarah, who was on the podcast last week. And it was about a hamster named Tyrion. And we weren't entirely sure if this was a confession that we could replay, but we did manage to dig it out of the crypt, and it's been given the all clear by the pencil pushers upstairs.
Yeah, because it was only a couple of years ago, so I don't think the rules have changed that much. Anyway, here for your listening pleasure is the one we called Game of Bones.
The Confessions Podcast.
So here we go with another drive time confession, and this will be the last in a while, actually. But if you miss it, there's always the Confessions podcast to download, and this week's will be available midday tomorrow. This one comes from James. Thank you, James, for tonight's tale. Dear Father Simon, the Forgiving Few, and Novice Nigel, if the story counts as being sufficiently food-based, which it does very, very vaguely. My confession, yes, my confession dates back to the spring of 2015. Different age. Anyway. Electro Velvet had just added to our formidable recent run in the Eurovision Song Contest. Didn't even remember them. And Colorado was in the midst of one of its classic late-season storms, dumping inches and feet of snow onto the sagging branches of trees that were now regretting their decision to leave early. You'll gather James is living in America. My two young children had a beloved pet hamster called Tyrion. Tyrion hamster. Now this, some people will go, oh, very, very droll. If you're a Game of Thrones fan, because Tyrion Lannister is, of course, a key role there. That's the main man. That's Peter Dinklage, who plays Tyrion Lannister. But
Are there
obviously,
any hamsters in Game of Thrones?
if you don't watch Game of Thrones, then by the time I've explained it, the joke about Tyrion hamster has sort of already waned just a little bit.
Who's Wayne?
Anyway, I had a pet hamster called Tyrion Hamster, who had been easing his way towards a gradual and inevitable decline after a year or two of entertaining us with the capacity of his cheeks and vain attempts to climb the thickly carpeted stairs. Unfortunately for me, on that snowy morning, the stately decline ended rather more abruptly than we had hoped.
Oops.
Turning the sad story into a positive learning experience, though, over breakfast, I broke the news to my kids. By the way, PG certificate on this one. A bit late.
Yeah, a bit late, but never mind.
Where's the culinary bit coming in?
Over breakfast, I broke the news to my kids, explaining how these things happen and that it is important to remember the good times that they all had together, which would act as a fitting memorial. They had other ideas for a memorial, and soon a plan was hatched to create a sort of pet cemetery in a corner of our back garden. Well, with visions of the Stephen King novel, which, if you've read Pet Sematary, is truly terrifying, where you bury your pets and they come back to life in a slightly more scary version. That's just the mild bit.
Okay.
It doesn't look as though Bob is going to be reading
I've not
this.
seen that.
I hope you know that. Anyway, with visions of the Stephen King novel and knowing how diggy some of the wildlife is here, like bears and mountain lions and raccoons, that kind of thing, I didn't think this was a very good idea, and I met the project with some initial trepidation. a suitable cardboard tube was found on our biscuit shelf to act as a biodegradable casket, with the thought that over time the decomposition and the circle of life might benefit one of the nearby trees. Isn't that a lovely thought?
Yes.
And I took the tube outside with the intention of peeling off the product label, and when the snow melted later that day, laying Tyrion to beautiful rest. Lovely. Now, earlier that month, Father Simon, through an expat group, my partner and I had become friends with a well-to-do English couple of a similar age. After a fun evening at a baseball game, we'd invited them to our house for dinner. A week after the eventful morning with my children, the fateful dinner arrived. We had decided to eat outside, enjoying the now warm weather and sunset over the continental divide. We only have 2 seasons here, hot and cold, and in what you would call spring, we flip back and forth between them every few days. Everything was going well until the dessert course, where I noticed to my horror that in all of the exchanging plates and shuttling food from inside and out, a certain forgotten biscuit tube had made its way from a shelf on the window planter to the table. Somehow, I had become distracted a week earlier, and I had forgotten to complete my burial task. Before I could react, our new friend, let's call him Steve, was, tube in hand, peeling off the lid. He glanced inside. Now, it might have been 1, the stench, or 2, the little eyes and claws that were staring straight back. Either way, he gasped, shrieked, and jumped in a most embarrassing way. And then he said these immortal words. Remember, he's well-to-do. Okay. There's a hamster in your hobnobs. Oh, I said, that's okay. It's just Tyrion. He's dead. Oh, well. Yeah.
Of course.
He replaced the lid. Our eyes met briefly across the table. I made excuses about finding some better cookie options and took the tube inside. I debated explaining to everyone what I had forgotten to do, but decided that admitting to keeping a dead animal outside for a week around the table we were eating on didn't sound much better than whatever he might already have thought. Curiously enough, there were no reciprocal dinner invitations after that night, and what had started as a promising friendship appeared to fade away. I seek forgiveness from Tyrion for leaving him exposed to the elements. My children, who'd been putting sesame seeds out and paying their respects to an empty grave, to the expat ex-friends who were probably expecting the worst and calling poison control on their way home, and to my hard-working partner who created a delicious meal and remains unaware of the impact it had upon our guests. Yours sincerely, James. And a note from the producer here: better warn people if they're about to be eating their food. Okay, well, if you're eating your food, then you might want to... too late. Well, you can see it was, it's tricky, and clearly James was trying to do the right thing. It's very busy, you've got a house of kids, and you think you've done the right thing with the hamster. He just forgot, Bobby Pryor. I don't know how forgiving you're feeling,
Well,
though.
the thing is, I can forgive him every single step except the last one. I understand how it happened, and that makes perfect sense. And living out there, of course, you don't want it dug up again, and etc., etc. But when the gentleman found them and said, you've got a hamster in your hobnobs, that was the
hamster in
perfect
your
opportunity to go, that's not what it looks like. Yes, he's dead, but this is what happened. Because it seems to be that you left your dinner guests really confused and a little bit troubled and concerned, and maybe not wanting afters. I would be. I was sitting there thinking, okay, something weird's going on here. So no wonder they never came back. So I think, James, you're not forgiven because you should have just explained.
Tyrion Hamster, at least, it was a natural way to finish. They were all trying to do the right thing, but I don't know what novice is going to make of this.
Well, when Tyrion was discovered, he could have gone, rodent infestation. He then fessed up.
He's dead.
He fessed up, but he could have suggested he didn't know anything about it. That would have been a much better way to go, I think, and then say, oh my God, we've been overrun with mice. I mean, where we are, we have a pet cemetery at home. They're all out the back. The guinea pigs, Ginger, Shaggy, Sleek, and Axe, don't ask, are all out there.
Which was the Axe?
Axe is another one of the...
guinea pig?
Yeah, others were all girls, and my youngest said, no, he's not going to have a girl guinea pig, he's going to have Axe. So Axe is actually a girl buried out there. Could have been Game of Thrones, but they're all buried under very big logs, and that's the key as well, because you don't want foxes digging them up. So you have to,
raccoons in this.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I wouldn't want too many raccoons in Hertfordshire. I think the fact that he forgot about it, and then the kids were out there, and men didn't go with the lie either. either. James, you're confused. So am I. So I'm not forgiving you.
Okay, right. Well, it's all down to Matt, who I think has got 2 votes here.
Yes. So I like this story for 2 reasons. One is it reminds me of that Fawlty Towers episode, the Basil the Rat, where the rat turns up in the Cracker Barrel. But also it had the phrase "there's a hamster in your hobnobs," and that is a phrase I shall now use all the time. It's going to be my favourite euphemism from now on.
But what will it mean?
It can mean anything.
Anything you want.
I couldn't come to the door. I've got a hamster in my hobnobs. So something like that. Yes, I'm going to forgive.
You're walking strangely. Yes.
The Confessions Podcast.
And that was your confession from the crypt this week, featuring Matt and Bobby and Nigel. And usually when there's a hamster that appears early on in the confession, it usually sort of flags up a problem. But the reason why I think Bobby was really okay with it was because, it had died of natural causes and someone just left it in a tube.
I'm always concerned when you mention the hamster word, and usually my face says it all, and there's normally silence over the radio. But you're absolutely right. It's a crumbly end.
A crumbly end?
I think. A crumbly end.
Well, I thought it was very nice. Anyway, so thanks for sending it in.
Yeah, and if you have a request for a vintage confession, then send as many details as you can, including when it first went out, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we will do our very best to dig them out of the crypt.
If you made it to the end of the last podcast, we ask you to tweet us the code phrase, I reconditioned a macerated toilet, Very strange on Twitter most of the time. Big thanks to Mrs. A, Michelle, John, Malcolm, John Bond, Neris, and everyone else who tweeted that. This week's code phrase is, can I sniff your hair? Which I do think is a very fine question to ask.
The answer is no.
Never.
I wasn't... Well, I know I was looking at you when I said that.
Yeah. But you didn't. You wasn't directed at me.
But the answer is still no anyway.
I spray my perfume on my hair, so actually I wouldn't mind people sniffing my hair.
Do you?
Because that's what you're supposed to do,
What do
yeah.
you put perfume on your hair for?
Because it lingers there. Someone told me, it might have been the people from Queer Eye, actually, that you just spray it and you spray it on your hair, and then when people walk past you, it just kind of wafts in their face.
I don't do perfume, but I thought it had to go on the back of your knees.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's what
when
I
are
thought.
people near the back of your knees?
No, I think that's what you
Well,
do.
they're not.
When you're
That's-
skip diving.
Well, that's what I thought was a surprise. Why is it on the back of your knees? But I always thought that was the
I think you're
place.
getting that confused with embalming fluid.
That's
I don't
almost
know.
it for this. I think we should leave at that point.
Yeah.
Yes.
Whenever we get to embalming fluid, it's time to leave.
Okay,
That's
enough.
it for this week. If you have something to get off your chest, send in your own confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
And don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and you can hear the show going out live from 5 o'clock every weekday on BBC Radio 2. Thank you.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.